My name is Allison Foster. I'm 36 years old, and I just spent 15 years building a successful real estate development career from entry-level property assistant to senior developer, finally purchasing my dream home through disciplined saving and strategic investment in appreciating properties. Last Tuesday, my parents James and Patricia showed up at my doorstep with 4 relatives in tow, announcing that I needed to give them my house for the family because they had sold their own home 1 week earlier to purchase my brother Derek a $940,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood he could never afford on his own. When I refused to hand over the keys to the home I had worked 15 years to purchase, my father slapped me across the face with enough force to split my lip in front of those 4 family members who all stood watching in absolute silence, apparently believing I should sacrifice everything I had earned for parents who had given my brother everything while expecting me to remain self-sufficient. What James didn't know was that the moment his hand struck my face, he triggered not only assault charges with multiple witnesses, but also financial fraud investigations that would reveal how my parents had actually obtained the money to purchase Derek's luxury home. I work as Senior Development Director at Meridian Real Estate Group, one of the Mid-Atlantic region's most respected property development firms, specializing in mixed-use residential and commercial projects that transform underutilized urban properties into thriving community spaces. My annual compensation is $290,000, including base salary, performance bonuses tied to successful project completions, and profit sharing from developments that exceed projected return on investment. The position requires sophisticated understanding of real estate markets, zoning regulations, construction management, financing structures, and community relations that determine whether multi-million-dollar development projects succeed or fail. I manage teams of architects, contractors, engineers, marketing specialists, and legal professionals who coordinate complex projects from initial land acquisition through final tenant occupancy. My career in real estate began 15 years ago, when I graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in urban planning and accepted an entry-level position as property assistant at a small commercial real estate firm in Richmond. The starting salary was $38,000 annually, barely enough to cover rent, student loan payments, and basic living expenses in a city where housing costs consumed nearly half my take-home income. The first 5 years of my career were characterized by long hours, minimal pay, and relentless learning about every aspect of real estate transactions, property valuation, market analysis, and development processes. I worked as leasing coordinator, property manager, acquisition analyst, and project coordinator, gradually building expertise across all aspects of commercial and residential real estate. The breakthrough in my career came when I identified an undervalued historic property in downtown Richmond that could be converted into luxury condominiums while preserving architectural elements that would qualify for historic preservation tax credits. I presented the development concept to my employers, secured their backing for the acquisition, and managed the 18-month conversion project that ultimately sold all 16 units at prices 20% above initial projections. That successful project established my reputation as someone who could identify valuable opportunities, manage complex renovations, and deliver profitable results that exceeded investor expectations. Over the following 10 years, I advanced through increasingly senior positions at larger firms, eventually joining Meridian Real Estate Group 5 years ago as a senior development director, with responsibility for projects valued between $10 and $50 million. But beyond professional achievement and substantial income, my most meaningful accomplishment was purchasing my own home 4 years ago, a beautifully renovated Victorian townhouse in Richmond's historic Fan District, featuring 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, restored crown molding, updated kitchen with premium appliances, and a private garden that provided peaceful outdoor space in an urban setting. The townhouse cost $475,000. Representing years of aggressive saving, strategic investment in my own real estate portfolio, and disciplined financial management that prioritized long-term wealth building over immediate lifestyle spending. I had saved $120,000 for the down payment through a combination of salary savings, returns from small investment properties I had purchased and renovated during my 20s, and bonuses from successful development projects. The mortgage was manageable on my substantial income, and owning the property provided both personal satisfaction and continued investment appreciation as Richmond's historic neighborhoods experienced renewed interest from buyers seeking character homes in walkable urban settings. The townhouse represented my independence, my professional success, and my ability to build wealth through strategic real estate decisions, rather than depending on family support or inheritance. I had furnished the space with carefully curated pieces that reflected my appreciation for historic architecture. Antique furniture restored to showcase original craftsmanship, contemporary artwork that complemented period details, custom window treatments that honored the home's Victorian heritage, and modern amenities integrated thoughtfully to provide comfort without compromising architectural integrity. The home office I had created in the third bedroom allowed me to work remotely when project schedules permitted, with built-in bookshelves displaying professional publications, development awards, and personal mementos from successful projects that had defined my career trajectory. But what I valued most about my townhouse wasn't the historic character or investment appreciation. It was the knowledge that I had earned this space entirely through my own strategic career development and financial discipline, never expecting or receiving family assistance to achieve homeownership. My brother Derek Foster is 33 years old and has never achieved sustained financial stability or professional success in any of the various careers he has attempted since graduating from college 11 years ago. His employment history is characterized by brief tenures in sales, marketing, construction, restaurant management, and various other fields that he entered enthusiastically before quitting when expectations for performance and accountability exceeded his willingness to sustain effort. Derek's approach to career development has always been characterized by seeking immediate rewards rather than building long-term value through consistent performance and skill development. He would take entry-level positions with grand plans for rapid advancement, become frustrated when promotions didn't materialize within months, blame supervisors or company culture for his lack of progress, then quit to pursue a completely different career path that he believed would offer faster success. This pattern of career instability meant Derek never developed specialized expertise, never built professional reputation in any industry, never progressed beyond entry-level positions, and never earned the kind of substantial income that would allow him to achieve financial independence or build personal wealth. His income over the past decade had averaged perhaps $45,000 annually when he was employed, but extended periods of unemployment between jobs meant his actual average income was probably closer to $35,000. This modest income, combined with his tendency toward impulsive spending and poor financial planning, meant Derek had accumulated no savings, no investment assets, and no realistic path toward home ownership through his own earning capacity. But throughout Derek's adult life, our parents James and Patricia Foster had subsidized his financial instability through direct cash gifts, paid rent during unemployment periods, covered car payments and insurance when his income fell short, and generally ensured that his poor career choices and financial mismanagement never resulted in serious consequences like eviction, repossession, or bankruptcy. James works as operations manager for a regional logistics company, earning approximately $110,000 annually managing warehouse operations, transportation coordination, and regional distribution networks. Patricia works as a senior administrative assistant at a medical practice, making around $55,000 per year handling patient records, insurance verification, scheduling coordination, and office management tasks. Combined, my parents' income was comfortable but not wealthy, making their ongoing financial support for Derek a significant drain on resources that should have been allocated toward their retirement savings, debt reduction, and building financial security for their later years. Have you ever watched your parents sacrifice their own financial stability to subsidize a sibling's poor decisions while expecting you to achieve success independently? But the differential treatment between Derek and me had been established during childhood and intensified throughout our adult lives. Derek's academic struggles, behavioral problems, and general lack of direction were always met with extra support, special accommodations, and lowered expectations, while my academic achievement and self-directed behavior were taken for granted as personality traits that didn't require recognition or encouragement. During college, James and Patricia paid Derek's full tuition at a private university that cost $42,000 annually, along with his housing, meal plans, transportation, and generous spending money for social activities and personal expenses. When Derek's grades fell below minimum standards and he was placed on academic probation, my parents hired tutors, petitioned the university for extensions and accommodations, and lobbied professors to give him additional opportunities to improve his performance. Meanwhile, I attended the University of Virginia on a combination of merit scholarships, student loans, and part-time work income that I earned through jobs in retail, tutoring, and eventually real estate offices where I began learning the industry while still completing my undergraduate degree. My parents provided no financial assistance for tuition, housing, or living expenses, explaining that I was capable of handling my own finances and didn't need help like Derek did. When I graduated and began my entry-level real estate career in Richmond, my parents offered no assistance with security deposits, moving expenses, furniture purchases, or the substantial upfront costs of establishing independent adult living in a city where rent consumed most of my modest starting salary. I was expected to manage these challenges independently because I had demonstrated financial responsibility and career direction that suggested I could handle adult life without parental support. But Derek's graduation 3 years later triggered completely different parental responses. When he struggled to find employment, or more accurately, when he quit multiple jobs within weeks of starting them, James and Patricia began providing monthly financial support that eliminated any practical motivation for Derek to develop sustainable employment habits or realistic career planning. They paid his rent in an apartment that cost more than what I had been living in while working my first real estate positions and saving aggressively for future property investments. They purchased a car for him and covered insurance, maintenance, fuel, and repair costs, even though Derek's irregular employment meant he couldn't reliably cover these expenses himself. They gave him cash for groceries, entertainment, dining out, and general lifestyle expenses that exceeded what his sporadic income could support, essentially subsidizing his ability to maintain a comfortable lifestyle without requiring the sustained employment and professional development that would make such a lifestyle financially sustainable. The most frustrating aspect of this differential treatment was my parents' characterization of our respective career paths and lifestyle choices. Derek's career instability was described as exploring different opportunities or finding his passion, while my focused real estate career development was sometimes criticized as narrow or too ambitious, as if my professional success reflected poorly on Derek's lack of achievement. When I worked long hours on development projects or traveled for property acquisitions and industry conferences, James would make comments about how I was missing out on life and focusing too much on work, implying that my career dedication was somehow problematic. But Derek's unemployment and job hopping were never characterized as problems requiring correction. They were challenges that the family needed to accommodate through continued financial support. This pattern continued throughout my 20s and early 30s as my real estate career flourished and my income grew substantially. The more successful I became professionally and financially, the more uncomfortable James and Patricia seemed about the growing wealth disparity between their children. "Not everyone is as naturally driven as you are," Patricia would say when I expressed frustration about Derek's continued unemployment and financial dependence. "Some people need more support to find their path in life. Derek has had a harder time than you did," James would explain, as if career success was a matter of innate luck rather than sustained effort, strategic planning, and willingness to persist through challenges. "You've always had an easier time with professional things." Their narrative required them to believe that my success was effortless and natural, while Derek's failures were the result of circumstances beyond his control, because acknowledging the reality that I worked harder, planned more strategically, and made better decisions would have forced them to confront their enabling of Derek's poor choices. But the most revealing aspect of my parents' favoritism was their response when Derek announced, at age 32, that he wanted to buy a house and settle down, despite having no savings, no stable employment history, and no realistic ability to qualify for a mortgage or maintain homeownership expenses. Instead of encouraging Derek to develop sustainable employment, build savings, and work toward homeownership through his own effort like I had done, James and Patricia decided to solve his housing problem by purchasing a house for him, using money from the sale of their own home. The decision was announced during a family dinner 3 months ago, as if it were a generous parenting decision rather than an extreme financial sacrifice that would leave James and Patricia without their own housing, while giving Derek an asset worth nearly $1 million that he had done nothing to earn. "We've decided to help Derek achieve his dream of homeownership," James announced at dinner, his tone suggesting pride in their parenting rather than concern about the financial implications of their decision. "We're selling our house and using the proceeds to purchase a beautiful property for Derek in Glenwood Estates." Glenwood Estates was one of Richmond's most exclusive neighborhoods, featuring homes valued between $800,000 and $2 million on large wooded lots with premium finishes and luxury amenities. The announcement that my parents were purchasing Derek a house in this neighborhood, while I had bought my own home in a more modest historic district through 15 years of personal saving, revealed the extent of their favoritism and financial irrationality. "Where will you live after you sell your house?" I asked, trying to understand how they planned to maintain their own housing after transferring all their home equity to Derek. "We'll figure something out," Patricia said dismissively, as if housing for themselves was a minor detail compared to the importance of giving Derek an expensive home he couldn't afford on his own. "Maybe we'll rent for a while, or stay with family temporarily until we find something suitable." The casualness with which they discussed making themselves homeless to give Derek a luxury property was shocking, but their expectation that family members would accommodate their housing needs after they gave everything to my brother revealed the entitlement underlying their entire favoritism dynamic. "Have you considered that Derek has no stable income to maintain a $900,000 home?" I asked, trying to inject some financial reality into their fantasy about solving Derek's life through property gifting. "Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities on a house that size will cost at least $30,000 annually. Derek will figure it out," James said with confidence that was completely unsupported by Derek's actual track record of financial management. Having his own home will give him the stability to build a successful career. Their belief that gifting Derek an expensive asset would somehow motivate better financial behavior and career development contradicted everything known about how entitlement actually affects motivation and personal responsibility. But pointing this out would only trigger accusations that I was jealous or unsupportive of their generosity toward my brother. Have you ever watched your parents make catastrophically poor financial decisions to favor a sibling while expecting you to somehow accommodate the consequences of their choices? The sale of James and Patricia's home proceeded quickly, with the property selling for $875,000 after paying off their remaining mortgage balance of $95,000. The net proceeds of $780,000, combined with additional funds from sources they never clearly explained, allowed them to purchase Derek a house in Glenwood Estates for $940,000. The math didn't quite add up. Even with their home sale proceeds, my parents would have needed an additional $160,000 plus closing costs to complete Derek's purchase. When I asked where this additional funding came from, James became defensive and evasive about the sources of the supplementary cash. "We had savings and investments that we liquidated," he said vaguely when I pressed for details about how they had financed a purchase that exceeded their apparent resources. "It's our money and our decision how to use it to help our children." His defensive tone and refusal to provide specific details about the funding sources created suspicion that something questionable might be involved in how they had obtained the additional money for Derek's house purchase. But at the time, I was more concerned about their homelessness and Derek's inability to maintain the property than I was about potential financial irregularities in how the purchase had been financed. The closing on Derek's new house occurred 2 weeks ago, transferring a $940,000 property into his name, despite his lack of stable income, employment history, or demonstrated ability to manage property ownership responsibilities. James and Patricia attended the closing with Derek, taking photos of him receiving keys to a luxury home he had done nothing to earn through his own effort or achievement. The same day Derek received his house, James and Patricia moved their belongings into a storage facility because they no longer owned a home and had no immediate housing arrangements beyond vague plans to stay with family temporarily until they found suitable rental property. The week following Derek's house closing was when the full implications of my parents' poor planning and favoritism became devastating for me personally. I was working from my home office on a Thursday morning, reviewing architectural plans for a commercial development project, when my doorbell rang at 10:30 a.m. I opened the door to find James, Patricia, my Aunt Karen, my Uncle Douglas, and two cousins standing on my front porch with serious expressions that suggested this was not a casual social visit. "Allison, we need to talk to you about something important," James said, his tone suggesting he was about to make demands rather than engage in genuine discussion. "Can we come in?" I felt immediate unease about the group composition. Why would my parents bring 4 relatives to an unannounced visit at my home on a weekday morning when they knew I would be working? But I allowed them inside, offering coffee and trying to maintain normal hospitality despite my growing concern about the purpose of their visit. We gathered in my living room, with James and Patricia sitting prominently on my antique Victorian sofa, while the 4 relatives positioned themselves near the doorway as if blocking potential exit routes. The staging felt deliberately intimidating rather than casual family visiting. "Allison," James began after an uncomfortable silence, "you know that we sold our house to help Derek achieve homeownership and give him the fresh start he deserves." I nodded, saying nothing while waiting to discover the actual purpose of this unusual family gathering at my home. "Well, now that Derek has his house, we need somewhere to live," James continued. "And we've decided that the best solution is for us to move in here with you." The announcement was so absurd that I initially assumed he was joking. Surely my parents didn't expect me to house them permanently after they had voluntarily sold their own home to give everything to Derek. But James's expression was completely serious, and Patricia's eager nodding confirmed that they genuinely believed I should provide free housing to accommodate their poor financial planning and extreme favoritism toward my brother. "You're not serious," I said, trying to confirm whether this was actually a genuine expectation or some kind of misguided humor. "We're completely serious," Patricia replied. "You have a 4-bedroom house with plenty of space, and we need somewhere to live. Family means helping each other during difficult times. You created your own difficult time by selling your house to buy Derek a mansion he can't afford," I said, my voice rising with anger at the audacity of their expectation. "I'm not providing free housing to fix your poor financial planning." James's face reddened with anger at my refusal to accommodate their demands. "Allison, we're your parents and we need help," he said with a tone suggesting I owed them housing regardless of how they had created their own homelessness. "After everything we've done for this family, you owe us this support." "Everything you've done for Derek, you mean?" I corrected, feeling rage building at their attempt to claim generosity toward the family when they had spent decades favoring my brother, while expecting me to be self-sufficient. "You've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, and now a nearly $1 million house. You've given me nothing except expectations that I handle my own life independently." Patricia attempted to interrupt with protests about how they had supported both children equally, but I wasn't finished responding to their absurd demands. "I worked 15 years to buy this house," I continued, my voice shaking with anger. "I saved every bonus. I invested in properties. I sacrificed lifestyle spending to build wealth. This house represents my success, and I'm not turning it into free housing for parents who made terrible financial decisions to favor my brother." The room fell silent as James and Patricia absorbed my absolute refusal to accommodate their housing expectations. The 4 relatives who had accompanied them shifted uncomfortably, apparently recognizing that their presence as witnesses was meant to pressure me into compliance through family obligation, rather than supporting my legitimate right to refuse. But James wasn't finished attempting to force my compliance with their demands. "Allison," he said slowly, his voice taking on a threatening tone, "we're not asking. We're telling you. You will let us move into your house. or you will face serious consequences within this family. Have you ever had parents threaten you with consequences for refusing to fix problems they created through their own poor decisions and favoritism? The threat of serious consequences for refusing to provide free housing to parents who had given everything to my brother was so outrageous that I actually laughed, a response that apparently pushed James beyond any remaining self-control. He stood up from my Victorian sofa, crossed the living room in 3 quick steps, and before I could react or any of the 4 relatives could intervene, his open hand struck my face with enough force that I stumbled backward against my dining table while tasting blood from a split lip. The pain was shocking and immediate, but the emotional devastation was worse. My father had physically assaulted me in my own home, in front of witnesses, because I refused to give up the house I had worked 15 years to purchase so that he and my mother could live rent-free after giving everything to Derek. I stood there with my hand over my bleeding mouth, looking at James's enraged face, Patricia's lack of any objection to the violence, and the 4 relatives who stood watching in complete silence, rather than condemning the assault or defending me from further violence. "You will give us this house," James said, apparently believing that physical violence would succeed where verbal demands had failed. "We need it more than you do, and you can find somewhere else to live." The assumption that I should give them my home because they needed it more, after voluntarily making themselves homeless to favor Derek, revealed the complete irrationality and entitlement that had been driving their behavior for years. But I didn't respond to James's continued demands or attempt to argue with someone who had just demonstrated willingness to use violence against me. Instead, I walked calmly to my bedroom, locked the door, and called 911 to report assault with multiple witnesses at my home address. While I waited for police to arrive, I could hear James and Patricia arguing in my living room about whether I was really calling police or just threatening them to get my way. Their inability to understand that assault is a crime with legal consequences rather than a legitimate negotiation tactic revealed how completely distorted their thinking had become. I also called my attorney, Marcus Thompson, who had handled my real estate transactions and personal legal matters for several years. Marcus was familiar with my family dynamics from previous conversations about estate planning and asset protection, so he wasn't entirely surprised when I explained that my father had just assaulted me in my own home while demanding I give up my property. "Stay in your bedroom with the door locked until police arrive," Marcus advised. "Document your injuries with photographs and make sure police interview all the witnesses who were present during the assault." 20 minutes after I called 911, Richmond Police Department officers arrived at my home to investigate the reported assault. I emerged from my bedroom to find 2 officers interviewing James in my living room, while the 4 relatives who had witnessed the assault stood nearby looking uncomfortable and anxious to leave. Officer Rebecca Williams photographed my split lip and swelling face, took detailed statement about the assault, and interviewed each of the witnesses about what they had observed. Despite their obvious discomfort, all 4 relatives confirmed that James had struck me after I refused his demand to give him my house. "Mr. Foster, you're being charged with assault," Officer Williams informed James after completing witness interviews. "You'll need to come to the station for booking and processing." James's shock at being arrested for assault revealed that he had never considered that hitting me would result in criminal charges rather than forcing my compliance with his housing demands. He attempted to argue that this was a family matter that didn't require police involvement, but Officer Williams explained that assault is a crime regardless of family relationships. Patricia became hysterical as officers led James out in handcuffs, screaming that I was destroying the family by pressing charges rather than being reasonable about their housing needs. Her characterization of my refusal to accept assault as destroying the family showed that she still believed I should sacrifice my safety and property to accommodate their poor decisions. The 4 relatives who had witnessed the assault left quickly once police had taken their statements, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the criminal investigation while avoiding any position about whether James's assault had been justified or condemnable. But I wasn't finished implementing legal responses that would protect me from future harassment and potentially reveal the financial irregularities that had enabled my parents to purchase Derek's expensive house. After officers left with James, I called Marcus Thompson back and explained that I wanted not only to pursue assault charges, but also to request investigation into how my parents had financed Derek's $940,000 house purchase when their resources appeared insufficient to cover the full price. There's a substantial gap between their apparent resources and the purchase price, I explained to Marcus. I think there might be financial fraud, undisclosed loans, or illegal transactions involved in how they obtained the funding. Marcus agreed that the financing discrepancy raised legitimate concerns, and that my assault complaint provided grounds for broader investigation into my parents' financial activities. He began working with law enforcement and financial regulators to examine how James and Patricia had obtained the money for Derek's house purchase. Have you ever realized that people's willingness to commit violence against you might be connected to other illegal activities they were already engaged in? The month following James's assault and arrest was characterized by expanding investigations that gradually revealed the financial fraud underlying my parents' ability to purchase Derek's expensive house. What began as assault charges against James evolved into comprehensive examinations of their financial transactions, tax returns, loan applications, and property transfers that had facilitated the $940,000 purchase. The investigation was led by Detective Sarah Mitchell from the Richmond Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, who specialized in cases involving mortgage fraud, loan application falsification, and illegal property transactions. Detective Mitchell's initial review of the Derek house purchase revealed numerous red flags that suggested systematic fraud, rather than legitimate financing. Ms. Foster, your parents' documented income and assets were insufficient to finance your brother's house purchase, Detective Mitchell explained during one of our meetings. They would have needed substantial undisclosed income, fraudulent loan applications, or illegal financial transactions to complete the purchase. The investigation revealed that James and Patricia had obtained an additional $180,000 through 3 different loans from private lenders who charged extremely high interest rates and required minimal documentation of income or assets. These hard money loans were typically used by property developers for short-term financing, but were inappropriate for individuals with no repayment capacity. More concerning was evidence that James and Patricia had falsified their income on loan applications, claiming combined annual income of $240,000 when their actual documented income was approximately $165,000. The false income statements constituted loan application fraud, a federal crime that carried potential prison sentences of up to 30 years. Additional investigation revealed that James had taken unauthorized loans against his company's retirement accounts, essentially stealing from his employer's benefit program to obtain cash for Derek's house purchase. The unauthorized loans amounted to $75,000 that James had no realistic ability to repay, given his actual income and expenses. The retirement account theft constituted embezzlement from his employer, adding serious criminal charges to the assault charges he already faced from striking me in my home. His employer, Consolidated Logistics, had begun their own investigation once the police examination revealed the unauthorized retirement account withdrawals. But the most shocking revelation was that Patricia had obtained $30,000 through fraudulent credit card applications, using stolen identities of patients at the medical practice where she worked. She had used her access to patient records to obtain Social Security numbers, birth dates, and personal information that allowed her to open credit accounts in others' names, then used the fraudulent credit to obtain cash advances that supplemented the funding for Derek's house purchase. The identity theft and credit fraud constituted federal crimes far more serious than the assault charges, potentially resulting in decades in prison for Patricia if prosecutors decided to pursue maximum penalties. Your mother is facing charges of identity theft, credit fraud, and conspiracy, Detective Mitchell informed me 4 weeks after the initial assault investigation began. The total value of fraud exceeds $150,000 when you include the falsified loan applications, stolen retirement funds, and fraudulent credit accounts. The comprehensive financial fraud that James and Patricia had committed to purchase Derek's house revealed that their favoritism toward my brother had driven them to criminal activity, with devastating consequences for numerous victims beyond just me. The patients whose identities Patricia had stolen faced damaged credit, fraudulent debts, and years of effort to repair their financial records. James's employer faced substantial losses from the embezzled retirement funds that might never be recovered given James and Patricia's lack of assets or repayment capacity. The private lenders who had provided loans based on falsified income statements faced defaults that would result in financial losses and potentially legal action to seize any assets James and Patricia still possessed. But the implications for Derek's house were perhaps most dramatic. The property he believed was his gift from generous parents was actually the proceeds of multiple criminal frauds that would likely result in seizure of the asset and its liquidation to provide restitution to fraud victims. "Your brother's house will probably be seized as proceeds of criminal activity," Marcus Thompson explained when I met with him to discuss the investigation results. "When property is purchased using funds obtained through fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft, it becomes evidence in criminal cases and subject to forfeiture. The possibility that Derek would lose his luxury home, not through his own actions, but because his parents had committed crimes to purchase it, created complex emotions. Part of me felt satisfied that the favoritism that had driven my parents to assault me was now destroying the very gift they had given Derek. But another part of me recognized that Derek hadn't asked them to commit crimes and might be an innocent recipient of fraudulently obtained property. Regardless of Derek's awareness or culpability, the house purchase had been financed through systematic fraud that would result in asset seizure, criminal prosecution of my parents, and potential civil lawsuits from victims seeking restitution for their losses. James's assault trial proceeded simultaneously with the financial fraud investigations, creating a situation where he faced immediate criminal conviction for hitting me while also confronting potentially decades in prison for the embezzlement, loan fraud, and conspiracy charges related to Derek's house purchase. His public defender recommended accepting a plea agreement that would consolidate all charges, the assault, the embezzlement, the loan fraud, and the conspiracy, into a single sentencing arrangement that would minimize his total prison time in exchange for guilty pleas to all counts. The negotiated plea agreement required James to plead guilty to assault, embezzlement of $75,000 from his employer, loan application fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The combined sentence was 8 to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after serving minimum 60% of the sentence. Patricia faced separate federal charges for the identity theft and credit fraud she had committed using patient information from her employer. Federal prosecutors were less willing to negotiate lenient plea agreements for identity theft cases, particularly those involving medical patient information and systematic fraud against multiple victims. Patricia's trial resulted in conviction on 14 counts of identity theft and credit fraud, leading to federal sentencing of 15 to 20 years in prison with no parole possibility under federal guidelines. Her systematic theft of patient identities and use of their personal information for financial fraud represented serious violations that federal judges treated with substantial prison sentences. The combined effect of James and Patricia's criminal convictions was that both my parents would spend many years in prison for crimes they had committed to purchase Derek a house he couldn't afford through legitimate means. Have you ever watched your parents destroy their own lives through criminal activity motivated by favoritism toward a sibling who contributed nothing to justify their crimes? Derek's response to discovering that his luxury home had been purchased through his parents' criminal activity was a mixture of shock, denial, and eventual anger at James and Patricia for involving him in their fraud without his knowledge or consent. Initially, Derek refused to believe that his parents had committed crimes to finance the house purchase, insisting that they must have had legitimate sources of income or savings that investigators hadn't discovered. But as evidence mounted about the falsified loan applications, embezzled retirement funds, and stolen patient identities, even Derek couldn't maintain his denial about the fraudulent nature of his house purchase. "I didn't know they were doing any of this," Derek protested when investigators interviewed him about his awareness of the funding sources. "They told me they had savings and investments that they were using to help me buy a house." His claims of ignorance were probably truthful. Derek's pattern of entitlement and financial irresponsibility suggested he had simply accepted the gift without questioning how parents with limited documented income could afford to purchase him a nearly $1 million property. But Derek's ignorance about the fraud didn't protect him from losing the house when federal authorities seized the property as proceeds of criminal activity. The forfeiture action required him to vacate within 90 days and prohibited him from claiming any equity or ownership interest in a property that had been purchased using fraudulently obtained funds. The loss of his luxury home left Derek essentially homeless and facing the same challenges that James and Patricia had created for themselves when they sold their own house. No property ownership, no accumulated wealth, and no realistic path toward achieving home ownership through legitimate means. Derek's initial response was to ask if he could move into my townhouse temporarily until he figured out his housing situation, apparently still operating under the family dynamic where I was expected to accommodate consequences of favoritism and poor planning that had benefited him. My response was immediate and absolute. No. You can't stay here, you can't visit here, and you need to understand that the favoritism that gave you everything has permanently destroyed our family relationships. Derek attempted to argue that he hadn't asked our parents to commit crimes and shouldn't be blamed for their decisions, but I wasn't interested in nuanced discussions about his culpability versus his benefit from their criminal behavior. You spent your entire adult life accepting money you didn't earn, houses you couldn't afford, and support you didn't deserve, I said during what would be our final conversation. The fact that it was financed through fraud just reveals how far our parents were willing to go to favor you over me. Derek's anger at my refusal to provide housing revealed that he still felt entitled to benefit from my success, despite never contributing to it, and despite our parents' crimes being motivated by their extreme favoritism toward him. But I was finished accommodating family members whose entitlement had driven them to criminal violence and financial fraud. I had no obligation to house Derek after he had received every advantage while I had been expected to build my success independently. The extended family members who had witnessed James's assault at my home responded to the criminal convictions and fraud revelations with varying levels of discomfort, defensiveness, and attempted distance from the situation. My Aunt Karen, who had accompanied James and Patricia to my home the day of the assault, called several weeks after the criminal trials concluded to apologize for not intervening when James struck me. I was shocked and didn't know how to respond, she explained, offering the same inadequate justification that many witnesses provide after failing to defend victims of violence. I should have stopped him or called police myself. Her apology felt insufficient given that she had stood watching while someone was assaulted in their own home, but I appreciated that at least some family members acknowledged their failure to protect me from violence. Other relatives, particularly those who had received financial help from James and Patricia over the years, seemed resentful that I had pressed charges rather than handling things privately, as if assault and fraud were family matters rather than serious crimes deserving prosecution. Several family members stopped communicating with me entirely, apparently viewing me as responsible for James and Patricia's imprisonment, rather than recognizing that their criminal behavior had created the legal consequences they were experiencing. But the most satisfying development was the comprehensive protection from future family harassment that the criminal convictions and restraining orders provided. James and Patricia were prohibited from contacting me while incarcerated, and post-release restraining orders would prevent them from approaching my home or workplace even after they completed their prison sentences. Derek was included in restraining orders based on his continued attempts to pressure me for housing and financial support, creating legal barriers that would result in his immediate arrest if he violated the contact prohibitions. The combined effect of the criminal convictions and restraining orders was that I could continue living peacefully in the townhouse I had worked 15 years to purchase, protected by legal consequences that prevented family members from using violence, coercion, or harassment to force me to accommodate their poor decisions and entitled expectations. 5 years after James's assault at my home, I continue thriving professionally as Senior Development Director at Meridian Real Estate Group, having recently been promoted to Vice President of Development with responsibility for projects valued between $50 and $200 million. My career success has continued generating substantial income that I invest strategically in additional real estate holdings, while maintaining my historic townhouse as my primary residence. The townhouse has appreciated significantly in value as Richmond's historic neighborhoods have become increasingly desirable. with my property now worth approximately $650,000, representing both market appreciation and the value of preservation work I've completed on period architectural details. But beyond professional success and real estate investment returns, the most meaningful outcome of that devastating assault 5 years ago is the clarity it provided about family relationships and the importance of protecting yourself from people whose entitlement and favoritism drive them to criminal violence. James and Patricia's willingness to commit assault rather than accept responsibility for their poor financial planning revealed that some family relationships are built on exploitation and expectation rather than genuine love or mutual respect. Their systematic favoritism toward Derek throughout our lives had culminated in them committing multiple financial crimes to purchase him a luxury home, then attempting to force me to give up my own home to accommodate the homelessness they had created through their choices. The decision to press assault charges and cooperate with financial fraud investigations was emotionally difficult initially, but became easier as the scope of my parents' criminal activity became clear. They hadn't just assaulted me, they had embezzled from employers, stolen patient identities, falsified loan applications, and destroyed multiple victims' financial security to favor Derek. Protecting myself from their violence meant also protecting numerous other victims from the ongoing fraud they would have continued committing to maintain Derek's unearned lifestyle. The woman who once worked 80-hour weeks to purchase her dream home had learned that some people will resort to criminal violence when their entitlement is challenged, and that the only appropriate response to such behavior is comprehensive legal prosecution rather than family negotiation or forgiveness. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments whether you've ever faced parents who committed crimes to favor a sibling while expecting you to sacrifice what you'd earned to accommodate their poor decisions. Have you experienced situations where family favoritism escalated into violence or criminal behavior when you refused to participate in enabling a sibling's entitlement? Your experiences might help someone else who's dealing with parents whose extreme favoritism has driven them to make illegal or destructive choices. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that parents who commit assault to force you to give up property you earned after they gave everything to a favored sibling deserve criminal prosecution and investigation, not family loyalty or understanding. Sometimes protecting yourself requires treating family members like the criminals they chose to become when their favoritism drove them to violence and fraud. See you in our next story here on Sweet Revenge Diaries.